Leaving the law enforcement profession was both the best and worst decision of my life. And in this episode today, I'm going to go a little bit deeper into my background, how I came to start my own company, and what we're doing now to help law enforcement officers go through the process of transitioning from a life of service to a successful career in the private sector. Let's get started. Good morning, heroes, and welcome to episode 8 of the Recruiting Hero Show. I am your host, Colin Whittington. I am also the CEO and founder of Recruiting Heroes LLC, a national employment agency dedicated to helping law enforcement officers and military veterans with their career transition to the private sector. Today, I want to get a little bit personal and talk about my background and the good, the bad, and the ugly that comes along with leaving law enforcement for jobs in the private sector. For many of you maybe considering a career transition yourself, it's a pretty nerve-wracking and difficult time in your career, whether you're currently approaching retirement or even just a few years into your law enforcement career. It's never easy to leave such an identity-defining uh, career like law enforcement is. And it certainly was for me. So I started off as a deputy sheriff with the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office in Northern Virginia. And it's the largest sheriff's office in Virginia with about 900 personnel, between 700 sworn and 200 civilian. I worked day shift and night shift throughout Loudoun County. I was a PIO for about a year. I was then promoted to sergeant and put in charge of the background investigation and recruiting unit. And that's really where I fell in love with recruiting. During my career, I got 2 life-saving awards. I was named the 2019 Deputy Sheriff of the Year for the state of Virginia, which was pretty cool and exciting for sure. But like so many officers today, a lot of young officers are deciding that law enforcement is no longer the career they wanted to be in. And that's what happened to me. About 7 years in, I started getting this nagging feeling it's inside my soul almost, where I realized that my heart and soul were no longer in line with law enforcement, and I just was really seeking something else with my life. There's numerous things, the frustrations about salary, the long hours, the overnight hours, missing holidays, missing birthdays, unspecial events. And a big part for me was just the bureaucracy of law enforcement as well. Simple initiatives would take, months to get approval for. And things like that just really started like irking me to a bit, and I started realizing that just my whole heart wasn't in it anymore. And I really believe that law enforcement is such an important career that people who are there should really want to be there and they should be fully invested. And I started realizing that it just wasn't me anymore. And if you're going through that experience yourself, it can be a challenging one for sure. I know for me, I try to bottle that feeling down for a good 6 months or so before I really started embracing it and realizing that no, this is for real. I'm actually wanting to leave. So take the time to talk with your family, talk with your friends, and make sure it's a decision that's going to be right for you. And only you can make that decision. At the end of the day, it's going to be coming down to you. You're the one who has to go on with the rest of your career and the rest of your life and be okay with the decision of leaving law enforcement or staying in law enforcement. And for me, it's been a mixture of, really, really good things as well as some bad things as well. So the good things, the quality of life has definitely improved in a lot of ways. I get to be home now with my family, get to not carry 2 cell phones with me anymore. I used to always carry my work phone with me and get calls all the time for different events going on or press releases that needed to go out, you name it. So that has been a huge, huge plus. And another part for me too, obviously the income part is nice as well. In the private sector, you are able to make a better income than you can in law enforcement in many, many circumstances. So that has been really nice. And then for me, honestly, the biggest improvement for me was my journey of starting my own company. And if you're a law enforcement officer who has, interest in starting your own company, all I can say is go for it. You don't have to have the whole path figured out, but if you have an idea, take the first step. I started this business in 2022, and I have I've never taken a single business class in my entire life. Not a single one. Not one in college, not one anywhere else. It's never taken one. So trust me when I tell you, you are no worse off than I was when I started. And I just took the first step. I got my LLC, and then I got my website and social media pages and just started reaching out to potential clients and building relationships. And Every single day, I'm learning something new. So if you have an interest in starting a business, I highly recommend you do it. It's been so rewarding. Building your own thing is just so cool. And I think you'll find a lot of enjoyment out of it as well. But that's what the private sector gives you. It gives you opportunities and flexibility. You can really go after things that align with your interests and your passions. Where in law enforcement, you're really structured and very, very much so in a very defined career path, very defined set of rules that you have to be there at 6 a.m. and leave at 6 p.m. or whatever your schedules are. And that's quite different than private sector. Of course, every company is different as well, but if you find a good company with a good company culture, you can have so much flexibility and freedom and the ability to think and to make a real impact in your organization. And that's what I found really cool about the private sector. But of course, there's some negatives as well. Leaving law enforcement is it's challenging. You're as I've already mentioned, in an identity defining career. And all of a sudden, from one day to the next, all of a sudden that's gone. And for some law enforcement officers, that can be a real challenge. For me, my first month or so out of law enforcement, I was doing okay. I was going to work. I was spending time with my family. I wasn't really thinking about it. I was still texting a few of my law enforcement friends now and then, but I hadn't really really sat down to think about what it was like to no longer be a cop. But then one morning, it was about 4 weeks after I left. I was getting ready for work, and I had slept bad the night before, and I was just going through the motions of getting dressed and getting ready to head out to the office. And as I finished getting dressed, I instinctively reached over to a hook where I used to keep my gun belt. And obviously that gun belt was no longer there, but I was just going in autopilot, and I thought I was just doing what I did when I was a cop for 8 years and reaching for it. And of course, when I reached for it, there was nothing there. And out of nowhere, this wave of emotion hit me, thinking about, wow, I am no longer in law enforcement. I'm no longer, on the thin blue line, and no longer a part of a real brotherhood and sisterhood that law enforcement is. And that day was pretty heavy. I'll tell you, it was hard. It was all of a sudden, all the emotions came in, thinking about that. And you might have your own gun belt type of day where all of a sudden it hits you. And perhaps you won't. Some officers talk about how it's just a really freeing experience to get out of law enforcement and that they couldn't be happier. And I hope that's the case for you as well. So definitely, I always recommend everybody make sure before you make the decision to leave, review your career in law enforcement and think, is there anything else you want to accomplish that you haven't accomplished? Because chances are this is your one chance to be in this profession. And if you know that you're done, that's completely fine. But first, be honest with yourself, and then you can be honest with others as well. If you know for sure that you're done with the career, then that's your decision, and you should be confident with that decision and move forward. But the lack of losing your brotherhood and sisterhood is one of the hardest things you're going to go through. Even small things like losing a take home cruiser for me, that was weird too. I didn't think of it as being a big thing that I would miss, but it certainly was. All of a sudden I was putting way more miles and using gas on my car way more than before, and needed oil changes sooner, tire changes sooner. The car obviously gets older faster as well. So that was a negative for sure. Losing part of your pension too. I left after 8 years, so I was still vested, so I'll still get some kind of a pension when I turn 50, but it's gonna be minimal. So I walked away from a relatively stable government pension. But this is the spot where I see a lot of law enforcement officers get stuck, where I basically call them the pension handcuffs. You feel like you're stuck because of the pension. And I don't want anyone to think that you're stuck in any kind of career, whether it be law enforcement or anything else. Of course, if you're about 2 years away from retirement age, then you probably should just stay to make sure you get the full benefit of your pension. But if you're like me and you're 8 or even 10 years in, and you're realizing this isn't quite what I want to do with my life anymore, I think you should consider, other opportunities, and don't just think, well, I still have 15 more years to get my pension. I might as well just do it. Chances are these next 15 years are going to be the best years of your life, right? You'll probably be the healthiest, the most time with your family, be able to do the most things. So if you're staying in a career that makes you unhappy and unfulfilled, that's just not a way to go through life. I would much rather you, with a plan, leave law enforcement, forego the full pension, but then be really proactive in the private sector to make sure you're making up for that difference. You can't just go out of law enforcement and go into the private sector and just spend all the money you make and think you're going to be fine in retirement. It's going to be a lot more on your shoulders to make sure that you're saving, that you're investing, and setting yourself up for success. But don't let the handcuffs of a pension keep you in law enforcement unless you're really dedicated and wanting to be in that line of work. The pension itself, for most of us, is not nearly good enough to keep yourself in a career that you're not passionate about. So be open to leaving that pension behind. Health insurance was another big negative for me as well. I left the sheriff's office, which had a pretty good healthcare system in place, into a tech company. We'll talk about this in the future videos. A company that wasn't really a good company. I shouldn't have joined, and their health insurance was pretty terrible. So ended up paying way more and getting way less coverage than I was at the sheriff's office. So keep that in mind as well. If you have health concerns, factor in how much health insurance is going to cost once you go off on your own, and it could be significant. So keep that in mind as well. But yeah, those are really the biggest negatives that I've seen leaving law enforcement. But for me personally, the positives have far outweighed the negatives, and it's been a phenomenal decision for me. I think it can be for you as well. But at the same time, if you're still driven to be in law enforcement, I hope you stay. This career is so important, and the thin blue line is so important. We need to have the best law enforcement officers on that line to maintain public order and just to make sure that the profession continues to improve and grow and just become better as we go along. Law enforcement, as well as any industry, any company or organization, should always strive to become better. And that's not to say that we're doing things wrong right now, but I think we should always strive to become better versions of ourselves and find ways to better serve the people that we serve. So I do hope the people that are watching this are still passionate about law enforcement stay in as long as you can and make sure that thin blue line stays healthy and that you protect, such an amazing and noble profession that you're in. And I really do thank you all for tuning in today. This is a relatively short video, but I just wanted to quickly touch on the pros and cons of leaving. And I hope that you can take some of these to heart and consider them when you make your own choices about leaving law enforcement. But have a wonderful rest of your day and stay safe out there. As always, it's a crazy world. And I thank you all for your service and see you on the next video. Bye, guys.